leicht ausspricht. Das jüdische Volk wird ausgerottet. Das sagt Ihnen jede Parteigenosse. Ganz klar steht in unserem Programm drin, Ausschaltung der Juden, Ausrottung, machen wir Kleinigkeit.
We're at the Holocaust Memorial Center, Zeckelman Family Campus. It's near Detroit, at the corner of Orchard Lake Road and 12 Mile Road. It was among the first of the Holocaust museums. This is its second home. We're one of the largest in the country, about 53,000 square feet. We see about 85,000 visitors a year, and we want to see each and every person from Detroit, all of Michigan. We see people from Canada, Ohio, Illinois. Students come from all over, and we see about 45,000 school children a year, and it's really an exciting place to find myself. The boxcar behind me is a ubiquitous symbol of the Holocaust. There's a half a dozen in this country. When I came here, there was only a model of one in the core exhibit. I felt that while there were still some in existence in Europe, that it would be important for us to have one here at the Holocaust Memorial Center for people to see and relate to. So a year and a half or so ago, I started negotiating, almost 2 years ago at this point, started negotiating with having a friend, the curator of railroads at the German History Museum near Berlin, watch out for us to see one that might become available. I know there are none left in Poland that are available, so I had him look everywhere in the country. And indeed, the Deutsche Bahn, the German railroad, was auctioning off this railroad car, among others, right? Just on a public auction. He suggested what I might pay for it, and we bid at auction. And we won that auction, and it took about another 6 months, actually, to ship it here. It weighs about 15 tons, about 30,000 pounds. It's 10 meters long, 35 feet long, about 10 feet wide, about 10 feet tall. So it's a big piece of freight. So it was very difficult to get it from the rail yard. It had not been used for the past about 35 or 40 years. And getting it from the railroad to the shipping point, and then getting it here to the Port of Detroit, and then getting it by truck here to the Holocaust Center. It was a very exciting day. We had the press helicopters flying overhead. A crane lowered it into a cradle we had for it here at the museum. And about a year ago, we began construction to close it in. We felt it should be indoors, not because of the weather. It was built in 1918. It's been sitting outside for 100 years. So I wasn't worried about the weather, but a number of people were concerned about vandalism. It is wood. It'd be able to be vandalized. So we moved it into this indoor environment. When you step into the museum, Right from the front door, right from the front reception desk, you see the boxcar. It sets a real tone for what's going to happen. Unlike most museums that have a boxcar or other sites in this country who commemorate the debarkation point, where you got off, where the Jews and other victims of the Holocaust got off the boxcars at a slave labor camp, at a killing center, at a transit point from which they were going to go to other camps. This is the embarkation point. This is where the victims of the Holocaust would have gotten on the boxcar. And just as they began a journey to slave labor, to a ghetto, to death, the visitor to the museum is embarking on a journey of knowledge, of learning, of experience, and emotion. And that's what I wanted to convey by having it right at the front. It is the first thing you see. It is also set in such a way that you can actually touch it. I don't mind people touching it. You can't hurt it. Like I say, it was in use for 50 or 60 years, and in the 1970s it was retired, and it's outdoors. You can't really hurt it. The environment in which we've set it is reminiscent of two different embarkation points. The floor below me is reminiscent of cobblestone, which would remind one of the Umschlagplatz, the gathering spot, certainly in the Warsaw Ghetto, but other places where Jews were loaded onto the boxcars. Not necessarily at a station, but just to get in. Loaded up, pushed by dogs, pushed by guards, and behind it is an 8/10 scale model of the Hamburg Railroad Station, which was built in the late 1800s, abandoned for use as a railroad station, and was used as a freight station. It was retired completely until the Holocaust, when the Nazis used it to load gypsies, that's Roma and Sinti, and Holocaust and Jews to their death. It was also used as a switching yard. So it was an important landmark in that environment. And these are the kinds of things that we want to contextualize in this history. Not only is the floor here in this space, but it continues outdoors, and the railroad tracks continue into the trees, and then covered by dirt, as if the railroad stopped, as if the railroad is no longer in use. Where literally the railroad's no longer in use, we know that other people are being led to their death and genocide even today. Just as boxcars, railroads are still the most efficient form of transportation for freight, it is that way in Europe. Railroad cars have been used for well over a century and a half at this point. These boxcars were used during World War I to move troops, and horses, and material to the World War I war front. As a matter of fact, many GIs, especially older veterans, will call it a 40 and 8 because it held 40 equipped cavalry soldiers and 8 completely equipped cavalry horses. During World War II, it was used naturally for freight, but it was also used for victims of the Holocaust to transport them from one place to another en masse, where, as I mentioned, you'd have 40 normal cavalry in one of these boxcars. As many as 100 victims would be crammed in here with no sanitation, no water, no food. And the trip itself, which could encompass 3 to 5 days, was also a killing center. It was a place where people died, sometimes crammed in so tight they could not even fall to the floor. When it was less crowded, you could sleep in shifts. It was embarrassing for the women who in those days, and especially among Orthodox Jews, were modest. And there was no way to be modest. There was no way for modesty to be. And it was a torturous journey, and it was a first place of torture and often of death. The boxcars not being opened until they arrived at a camp or a ghetto, when they would be shuttled off just as quickly as they were shuttled on by dogs, guards with batons and sticks, and then sent to their death or perhaps to slave labor.
Die Reichtümer, die sie hatten, haben wir ihnen abgenommen und ich habe einen strikten Befehl gegeben, den Obrigkeitspropol durchgeführt hat. Wir haben diese Reichtümer restlos dem Reich, dem Staat abgeführt. Wir haben uns
the intrinsic reward, the feeling I get for working here and that relates to working here is more important than the big intrinsic reward. Of course, I have to pay my rent. I have to feed my family. I'm no different than any other person who works for a living that way. But I know if I were in the private sector, I'd be making more money. But money is not the most important thing. Once the extrinsic things are taken care of, once the money is taken care of, everything else is, what do you get out of work? If you're an attorney doing corporate law, what's your reward other than the money you're making? If you're making a product, it might be a product that does real good for people, but you're just building something. Here I'm building better human beings. I'm giving children hope. And following a group through the museum, when the docent reaches a certain point, you can see a light go on in a child's eyes. And that's the real reward I get for having done this for 25 years. I want people to know, and believe it or not, there are people that don't, that the Holocaust was real, that it affected real people in a real way, and is affecting lives today. We're losing them, but we still have survivors that speak to our visitors very often, and they can see television videos about these survivors, they can hear the speeches of these survivors, and they can learn about their lives. But it is also affecting human beings directly. Their children were tremendously affected. The next generation even was affected. I was listening last night the other day to a survivor, a child of survivors, who said, I can't imagine a world in which your mother does not wake up in the middle of the night screaming, because that happened to him so often. Another child of survivors tell me, now I understand, having learned about the Holocaust at a place like this. Now I understand why my mother slept with a packed suitcase under her bed all the time. This happened to real people. But the message we want to convey is not one that, sure, human beings are terrible to one another. Believe me, everybody knows that, especially a child who might be bullied, or a child that's growing up in poverty, or with discrimination, or who feels he doesn't have a chance. The message we want to convey is one that there are good people, those who rescued, righteous among the nations, those who risked their lives, their careers, the lives of their families to save another child, to save a person, to save a family, or like Wallenberg, to save thousands of individuals. And again, he risked his career on these actions he took. And we want, especially the children that feel they have no hope, that there is no sense of self-worth, of value, that their only options are living in poverty, working at a minimum wage job, or becoming a criminal of some kind, that there are alternatives. If these people survive this, if these survivors manage to come to the United States, all over the world, make new families, make new careers, make new lives for themselves, if that can happen after this worst of human condition, then perhaps there is something that can be done with this child who feels no value. What difference does it make if he picks up a gun if his life has no value? What difference does it make if he joins a gang, if his life has no value? What difference does it make if he gets killed in a gang war, if his life has no value? We want children to leave here with a sense of hope, a sense of self-worth, and of that there is a chance, that there is hope for humanity and there is hope for each child. And each child is also responsible for the other. That if we see something going on, like the government says now, if you see something, say something. If you see somebody being bullied, don't get involved. You could get hurt, but tell somebody. Most children, my grandkids do, have cell phones. Call 911 and saying there's a fight going on here and a girl is being assaulted. There's something going on here and I see something terrible happening to somebody on the street corner, and it's right in front of my Elm Street school. Whatever it might be, that we have responsibility as human beings, as citizens in a democracy. We have the responsibility to stand up for the other. We are all one in a real sense. And you feel empowered when you do that. You feel, I'm helping somebody. And that's an amazing feeling of empowerment. And this, what I used to call civics lesson when I was a kid, that it is incumbent on us to vote. It is incumbent upon us to watch our government. And it is incumbent on us to watch out for our neighbors, for those less able to take care of themselves, and to take care of the poorest among us, and to take especially care of the minority when we're in the majority. We accomplish those lessons I just spoke of. It's not just Holocaust museums that do that, but the other World War II museums, veterans memorials and monuments. That we must provide a mechanism beyond the schools for learning, for teaching, for studying. We must have this focus on a particular subject to allow us to focus then on the more general. Just as we go from learning about the Holocaust and the history of the Jews in Europe to learning about responsibility for our fellow man. The same thing happens in a science museum when a child sees these simple experiments and these things that they can participate in, that a cure for cancer will only be found through science. That all the wonderful inventions we have around us, all the wonderful mechanical devices were all done as a result of science. And that this is important too. That there are things greater than each one of us. We're never, at this Holocaust Museum, and most others that I've been to, we're not preachy. But we teach that there is an absolute morality, that there is an ethics involved with almost everything we do. Ethical filmmaking, ethical editing when we make a film, ethical public speech. And perhaps we can then change our country and perhaps the whole world to have a more collegial dialogue among people with different opinions, different religions, different backgrounds, and different ideas about how we should live. But if we accept that the other has a place with us, then we can have a dialogue. Then we can potentially have peace. If we're at a point where there is no point for dialogue, we're doomed. And if we don't coexist together, certainly we will perish together.